Hello. So let us continue with Najdorf, and this lesson will be about the solid positional systems which white can choose against Najdorf. Well, first of all, for some of you who don't like extremely sharp, complicated play where you need to learn lots of force variations, especially if you're playing white, black has choices, and in order to fight for advantage, sometimes in sharp lines you must take quite some risks. So some of you would like to play against neither something where you have, well, quite serious control on the position and the game is more going into the quite strategical path. So here I think I've chosen three moves which are not too harmless. Well, especially bishop e2, which is of course a very serious option. And also, of course, I would like to tell what I think, how to fight against those moves with black. I think black is fine in all those lines, but anyways, you need to know it well, especially if you're playing Sicilian, Najdorf. Probably you are a player who likes dynamics, sharp, complicated games. So those positional lines might be not fully your cup of tea, maybe you not like it so much. So in such case, then you need just to know exactly move per move, exactly how to fight against it and how to equalize. So let's start with the bishop d3. This move lately started to be quite a frequent guest in tournament play on the top level, on the grandmaster level. Of course, black has a wide choice of perfectly playable options against bishop d3. For example, you can always play e6 as black if you like more this kind of structures. Scheveningen structures, e6 is perfectly playable. White is usually going f4 and then queen c7, and well, there is a lot of theory via different move orders possible to get this position. You can study it. I mean, it's playable with white. Probably queen e2 is the move, and but also with black. But I actually think that after bishop d3 there are much more well, straightforward ways for black to equalize. I mean, this at least gives white a certain play. I mean, you can definitely play this position with both colors, so it's a normal, complicated Sicilian, where white has some chances for opening advantage. So this shouldn't worry white much. And so what I would like to offer you is a main move is e5, and I believe it's a good move. It's enough to equalize, but there are two more moves, especially knight c6, which is not very popular, but I don't see really why. I think black is perfectly okay after knight b3, after knight c6. So now, yeah, of course, knight b3 is nothing really, especially with the bishop on d3. So white has two moves. Bishop e3, I think black should be fine after knight g4. You must take on c6, bc6, bishop d2, and now g6. As I've already mentioned, in those positions, it's if you have a chance, if your pawn is still on e7, it's better instead of, let's say, putting the pawn on e6 and bishop e7, it's better to play g6, bishop g7 if you are in time. And here, black is in time. Let's say f4, bishop g7, h3, knight f6. Well, sometimes e5 works in such positions. Here it obviously doesn't work, and then black just castles, puts knight on d7, and once you manage this setup without something, well, something direct what white can manage, like e5 or anything else, I think black is just doing very well in this type of position. So bishop e3 is quite harmless. White's idea is to take on c6, bc6, and now to play b3, bishop b2, this setup. And for some reason, I guess the only reason why black doesn't play it more often, like this knight c6 against bishop d3, is that engines given some some plus for white in this position, 0-4, and at least at the beginning, and then I guess everyone just wants to play a line which would be 0-0 for black. But in fact, I think black is just fine here. I mean, g6, bishop b2, bishop g7. Now, yeah, quite important, because knight a4 would be a good move, at least to kind of pin black's bishop on g7, but then queen a5 check is a very important maneuver, bishop c3 and queen g5. And here black is doing fine. Queen is quite good on g5. So that's why queen d2 is the main move. And now knight d7. That's important to a very typical plan for black. And here, well, what is usually white, what white can do? I mean, short castle shouldn't be a problem, so white can start with h4, for instance, but then black anyway plays h5, or knight a4. Knight a4, take on b2, knight takes b2, knight c5, h4, computer likes to try h4, let's say black plays h5, and here I studied a bit this position. Engine at the beginning here gives 0-4 for white, slightly better, but then slowly you start to move, to make few moves, and it starts to get down and down, and finally gets to equality. And I don't quite understand why it should be better for white. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an equal complex position. I mean, usually white is trying to go for a long castle, but black has some play with a5 and so on. In general, black has a solid position. King should probably for the time stay in the center, because castles can be dangerous sometimes, but all in all, perfectly playable for black, and very simple. I mean, so pay attention on this move knight c6 with black. But with white, first of all, not too many people play knight c6. Secondly, still white has some chances for a small plus. So that is about the rare knight c6 move. I think g6 is very, very good move if you want just to play for a win. I mean, to play complicated, just sharp position. I find g6 perfectly playable. Okay, castles, usually bishop g7. This normally shouldn't be anything for white, because a bishop on d3 is not too good. And in general, as I've already mentioned, against dragon, the variations where white castle short are normally not too dangerous. So here I wouldn't be worried at all with black. Then the question is, maybe white should try to play for long castle. But how exactly? If he starts with bishop e3, well, you can of course go bishop g7, and probably white would play f3 most likely. But I think knight g4 should be okay in this position. Bishop g5, let's say h6. And now, if bishop h4, it's actually quite funny that black can get bishop g7, bishop e2, g5. Bishop g3 is the best move, and all of a sudden we end up in a very well-known theoretical position of 6 bishop e3 knight g4 variation, which I'm going to cover in during the next lessons. And in general, it's considered to be perfectly well reliable for black. I mean, white is struggling to find any advantage here, so that is a serious option, knight g4 after bishop e3. That's why usually white starts with f3 here, and it's also not so clear just bishop e3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight bd7. It's perfectly playable, but I found that queen b6 move, to me it seems to be very doing quite well, because of course I'm not actually threatening to take on d4, obviously, because of bishop b5 check, but black just wants to finish his development and actually trying to stop white from developing, because bishop e3, queen takes b2 works. So just to bother white, not to allow him to this setup with long castle. And I don't really see an advantage for white. Of course, the position is complicated still again, but it seems to me that it's very interesting. For example, a3, is well, very serious move. The idea is that now I just want to play bishop e3, and after queen takes b2 there will be knight a4. So let's say if knight c6, then probably bishop e3 works already. I mean, not for sure it works, and this might be in white's favor, because yeah, what I mean is that here the queen is trapped already with a pawn on a3, and after knight d4 bishop d4 you still cannot take this knight. But after a3, black has knight d7, very important move, otherwise he would probably just be worse. But after knight bd7, bishop e3, that was the point of a3, and now e5. e5 seems to work pretty well, knight f5, knight c5. And the position is very sharp and complicated. b4 probably has to be played, gf, and engines assess it as more or less equal, complicated, equal position. Yeah, very, very sharp and unclear. But it seems to me that it's at least interesting line for black. I mean, it seems to be working. And another move is knight b3, but that also leads to my understanding, very unclear, complicated position. Bishop g7, let's say bishop g5. That's at least what engines are showing as the best. Bishop e6, simply queen d2, knight c6, long castle. That is the plan, yeah, for white. But of course, again, you already know that knight on b3 is not so well placed in this type of position. So rook c8, and I checked it with engines just before recording this course, this particular lesson, and I think black is okay. King b1, you can just castle. For instance, h4 is logical, but black has his counterplay. I mean, h5 is useful, even though actually maybe knight e5 works, but okay, h5 and knight takes h5, there is no clear mate here. Maybe black is just fine. But just even in case you can play h5, then you want next knight e5. After g4, there is knight e5 also, and the position is very unclear because black has his own play. F3 is hanging, then rook takes e3 very often is the idea. So to me it seems like g6 is perfectly playable with black, if you want to play a complicated game and to have winning chances. But e5 as well is okay. I mean, bishop d3 is quite harmless line, I must admit, but at least it's not, the theory is not so developed as in many other lines, and most of the time you can get a game with white. So that's why I mean, from time to time you can try this bishop d3 move. It's playable, but well, I shouldn't really expect to get any opening advantage after bishop d3. Probably you will just get, if your opponent is prepared, if he listened to this course, you will probably just get a complicated, playable, unclear position. So after e5, knight d2, that is the plan. Bishop e7, the most logical, castles. And now knight g3 is probably the best, because f4, as usual, black just ignores, playing b5, knight g3. Again, playable position, but I don't think white is any better, just complicated, very typical Sicilian. Black, for instance, can play knight c6, which is also fine. Let's say h3 and just take on f4 and knight e5 with well, typical Sicilian position. I would say pretty equal, but double-edged. Or engines like even more to play knight d7, but that looks at least humanly a bit dangerous. Yeah, knight f5, rook e8, queen f3, bishop f8. But it's very principal, and because black also wants g6, knight c5, b4. I mean, position can get tricky. White has some initiative, queen g3, g6, for instance, but well, it can also backfire because black is extremely solid, so the game is very sharp. Again, playable for both sides, very, very unclear. That's why knight g3 is usually what white plays here. Bishop e6 is logical. Again, now f4, of course, white wants to play f5, but you can just take knight d7, knight to e5, and it's pretty equal. Here you don't even need b5 move. So knight d5, that is white's idea. Now, actually, most of the time, black takes on d5 with a bishop ed, g6. And this position, there was a game, I think, Nakamura Vashila Graf in Stavanger once, rook e8, c4, knight bd7, rook c1. Also Anand against Kamer. There were a few games of strong players. Very important game is Nepomniachtchi Vaitashek also. I think it was very principal. But here I believe it's playable for white. I mean, black is probably okay. I mean, finally, if he knows exactly what he is doing, but still white has two bishops and there is certain potential of the attack with f4 at some point. I mean, white's pieces are quite well placed. Even the knight on g3 is actually not so bad, despite this pawn on g6. I mean, it has some prospects also. So all in all, playable for both sides, but at least here it's not, well, it's quite interesting from the white side. I mean, this position I would seriously consider to play with white. Not that I wouldn't be so worried with black also, but at least white has chances. So, in fact, if you want just to equalize just to play for equality, I believe, I don't think that there are too many games like this, but I believe you can just take. And of course, here takes queen d5, knight c6. White is a little bit better, but I couldn't find. I checked a bit with, again, what engines are saying, and it seems that after a few moves, black still needs to play a few accurate moves, but his position has a very good reserve, equalizing reserve, and in general, let's say 4f5. That is what engines are showing, bishop e3, g6, and quite soon, well, it seems that black is able to equalize here and to have a very, kind of simple, solid, normal position. So that is an option for you if you want to just to equalize, I mean, to be sure that you are making a draw. But if you want complicated games, complicated positions, then g6 or knight c6, I think, are perfectly fine also. So, okay, bishop d3, definitely I gave you, for black, a lot of different options. And from the white side also, you see that in every line, in all of those lines, it's playable for white. So it's still white who is fighting for a small advantage. Yeah, so that's not always the case. Sometimes if you are playing side lines against Najdorf, it's already black who is trying to take the initiative. So here at least white is in control. So yeah, that is about the bishop d3 move. So now let's move to g3. I'm sorry to repeat this like mantra that all those g3 lines against Sicilians are most of the time are not too dangerous. Here also, but it's okay. I mean, it's playable. Actually, it reminds very much the bishop e2 variation when black is playing e5 with a certain nuances. So there is not so much theory after g3. I mean, there is a lot of theory, but the theory is not so forcing. So it's more a positional game, especially, I mean, at least after e5, after e6, it can be positional, but also sharp, depending on the white choice. So yeah, again, playable variation. I think I've played it myself also, by the way. But again, I wouldn't again be worried with black. Black has a choice, as most of the time in Najdorf. That is also why Najdorf is such a serious weapon, because on practically all lines, if not just all, black has actually a choice. Yeah, and it's not only one line, as in quite a number of other Sicilians, black has like the only line which works. But here black has choices. So after g3 also there is a choice. G6 is possible, but here with a pawn on a6, it might not fully equalize. I think white is a bit better here after bishop g2, bishop g7, let's say h3 or castle first. Castle, knight c6, bishop e3. There were some games of Magnus Carlsen, here some other strong players. It's a little bit uncomfortable for black because white have managed h3, bishop e3. As if you remember Dragon, that if the pawn is on a7, white simply is not in time to get h3, bishop e3. And here, rook b8, let's say knight d5 is possible. White has a bit of a plus and quite pleasant position to play, even though again it's maximum slightly better for white and of course playable for black. But yeah, against move like g3, I guess you would like something more more convincing to equalize. E5 is a main line, is the most popular move, and I think it's doing perfectly fine. I think it's a good move, leading to complicated strategically complicated positions and more or less equal. But also E6 seems to be okay, because as I've already mentioned that those Scheveningen structures, I mean, against G3 are usually pretty fine. The only difference here that after bishop G2, white can try to play for aggressive plans like G4 or bishop E3, queen E2, and maybe that's the only really challenging way of playing, because I think, yeah, let's say if bishop E7, then white would probably start with bishop E3. And now, well, here also there are some tricky move orders. Maybe here queen C7 might be interesting. This position is not, I mean, okay, if white castles, then it gets to the same, then it gets to a very classical position. But white, I think more maybe prospectors for white to investigate all those lines where white is trying to play long castle and to push on the king side his pawns. So, but that also is pretty much sometimes a matter of move orders. So maybe this queen c7 move order is interesting, just not to hurry castling in order that, you know, to meet g4 with some, maybe with h6 or knight c6, knight d7, just in case to have the king in the center. Yet, I mean, it's interesting, it's possible. But even if you just castle, okay, g4, that is white's plan. Knight c6, g5, knight d7, h4. This position is not easy for black. I mean, white has chances for some plus, but takes, b5, it's pretty direct. f4, very logical play. Knight c6, bishop e3, and let's say bishop d7. Okay, it's a complicated game. Black is playing rook c8 next. Computer is showing, well, 0-3 for white. Doesn't mean actually anything in this position, because it's complicated. The game is ahead, and the one who feels those positions better, who has more experience, who is more resourceful will prevail in this game. Because what is the difference if it's 0.3 or 0.1 for white? It's clear that the game is lots of things will be happening still in this game, because of course white is not really mating with h5. Yeah, just to show you that you shouldn't be too worried with black to get mated. Well, first of all b4, but even let's say rook c8, because g6 you can always play even h6 in those positions, especially with the bishop on g2 already blocking the g line. Yeah, there is no mate. Yeah, and long castle can be very dangerous. Black organize very quick. I mean, first of all, here simply b4 works. So probably white will go for short castle here and just enjoying certain space advantage, somewhere f5, but f5 is also not mate, because knight e5 always comes, I don't know, rook c8, b4. I think black is okay in general here. I mean, it's perfectly playable for black, but also you can start with the queen c7. The idea is that now, again, castles, as I've already mentioned, bishop e7, I think these positions are playable, but no more than just playable for white. A4, for instance, sooner or later, knight c6, and yeah, I mean, white can try to play bishop e3, but actually here, I mean, I think it's less dangerous than with white's bishop on e2, because with the bishop on e2, white has more control on the c4 square, and because in these positions very often black starts to get knight e5, knight c4. I mean, this square is not under control of the bishop. So okay, you can study this as a type of position. I did, and I had a feeling that with the bishop on g2, there are less chances for opening advantage than with this more classical setup. But of course, it's playable also for white. Then if bishop e3, maybe knight c6 now. Actually, quite interesting engines are saying that even b5 is possible, which might be a good move. And in case of e5, bishop b7 works. But let's say if you don't want to something complicated, knight c6 can also is fine, because you are just stopping g4 now with it. Yeah? After g4, you can take on d4, e5, and the pawn will be hanging. And let's say it's this type of play: f4, bishop e7, queen e2. Here it's quite harmless, because also very typical maneuver, which works, of course, not 100% of the times, but quite often, especially with the bishop on g2. You take, play e5 and b5. Yeah, very, very classical. And then you want b4 sometimes, so just castle. Just unclear, complicated, unclear position. Black is fine here. But maybe after queen c7, g4. Again, if you want to play aggressive, then g4 is a very serious option. h6, h4. Now it gets quite direct, but I think at the end of the day, in the position which arise, black is okay also. Knight c6, g5, hg, hg, exchange on h1, knight d7, and g6. Well, let's say if f4, I think black can take, just play b5, bishop b7, rook c8. It's a little bit unusual position. Normally, of course, you have rooks on the board on the h line, but I think the absence of those rooks are in black's favor. White has less attacking possibilities, and black has his typical counterplay. Then, if bishop e3, knight c5 seems to be very unclear and complicated, but also g6 maybe is interesting, just to stop white's play. And I think in general must be okay for black. I don't see why white should be better here. But the challenging move is g6 here. g6, knight takes d4, queen take on f7, king f7, queen takes d4. And here black still has to be accurate, but I think at the end of the day, he manages to equalize, let's say, bishop e7, not the only move, by the way, but quite logical. Queen d1 now, because bishop f6 was a bit annoying otherwise. Queen d1 trying to check on h5, let's say knight f6, bishop e3, and now, for instance, bishop d7. Sometimes you go rook h8. Yes, it's true that the king is a bit, on f7, is a bit vulnerable. I mean, potentially, for the moment, it's pretty solid. But also, white's king is not so safe, because black has certain options. I mean, when white is going to play long castle, and probably is going to go for long castle, then black will also have his counterplay with rook c8, queen a5, or rook h8, then b5, b4. So I think black is okay. So in my opinion, e6 is perfectly playable after g3. So if you prefer more those structures, yeah, definitely I can recommend you. With all this knowledge which I gave you here, you will get a decent position. Only thing that maybe you should study a bit more this classical way of playing. I mean, when white is just playing with a short castle. So then g3, but e5 is good. e5, I mean, nowadays most of Najdorf players, they actually like to play these structures after a6 and e5 against many white's variations. Let's say bishop e2, also e5 now is very popular. And after g3, many strong players are just playing e5 to get the same type of position. And I also think it's I quite like. I mean, I don't see any advantage for white after e5, so can definitely recommend you. Also, that e5, there is nothing wrong with this move. So, well, white has 3 tries. Knight f3 is played sometimes. It's a little bit strange idea. Knight h4. Now, trying to get the knight on f5. Well, now only don't play g6, because it's kind of natural, yeah, to stop knight f5, to play g6. Because this is a trap, because now white has this knight g2, actually quite nice maneuver. And knight is in time to get to e3, and then bishop g2, knight cd5, here white is better. So after knight h4, you should castle first, that is important. Now knight g2 is already white simply not in time. It's a clear tempi, so it's too slow. After castles, white plays bishop g2 and okay, here g6. By the way, bishop g4 is not a bad move also. I think it's probably enough to equalize. Let's say if bishop f3, you take knight c6 and knight d4 takes, knight e2, and this position I studied some time ago. It's actually equal. It's fine for black. But also g6. Yeah, g6 is okay. Castles and the typical play bishop e6. Let's say a4. Now, if knight c6, knight d5, so a4, knight d7. Well, bishop h6, rook e8. Yeah, it's not a big drama that you can, because then also knight g4 will be threatening. Not quite clear what the knight doing on h4. Usually it starts to come back at some point to f3. So white pretends that losing those two tempis, he weakened black's position on the king side, but it's not. Of course, it's true. I would prefer my pawn on g7 here, but does it worth two tempis? I have my doubts. I mean, rook c8 you can play simply sometimes. Yeah, I think it should be okay for black. So knight f3 is quite harmless. Then knight d2, this is what I played myself once against Anish Giri in London in classical chess. Anish played some new setup at that time, bishop e6. He started with bishop e6. Normally bishop e7 is the main move. And after bishop g2, he played h5. Actually, it's clear he wants just to transpose if white plays h3, just to stop h4. Then it would be more or less transposition to all those lines which we are going to consider in our next lesson, which is 6h3 move. I think I played, so it's quite playable, very okay. I mean, also in general here in this variation you can play in different ways with black. Yeah, so it always will be more or less playable, equal, but you have to be careful because of course white has a very solid and healthy setup, and there is a certain strategical danger if you don't know exactly what to do. I mean, white can slowly build up his position, I mean, and get an advantage, and it happens from time to time. So better that you know exactly what you are doing, that you decide for yourself, that not like over the board you start to think what plan I would choose today. Better you know, okay, I'm playing like this, or this is my repertoire, I'm going for this line or that line with black. So h5, I think I played bishop g5, knight bd7, queen d2, bishop e7. Well, here the difference is usually I've mentioned that if bishop g5, black is in time to play knight d7, he's okay, but that is with a pawn on h7, because then black can always play h6. Here you cannot really get rid of this bishop, but still the position is perfectly playable. You can check this game, was very complicated, ended in a draw. But I don't see anything wrong with bishop e7. I think it's equalizing. Bishop g2, let's say castles, and b5. Yeah, I think it's just equal, actually. Well, very typical. Black simply wants to develop bishop b7, knight d7. So, well, white's problem here that if he starts to play a4 earlier, let's say just to stop b5, then you already probably know knight goes to c6, and then the b4 square becomes a very tasty place for the black's knight. So usually in this type of position, very often white is waiting for black to put the knight on d7 and only then playing a4. And in the meantime, trying to meet b5 with something rather direct, because if black manages his setup here, bishop b7, knight d7, rook c8, okay, it can be slightly better simply. So the idea that after b5 here, knight d5 is what usually white trying to do. It's probably better than to play a4 before knight d5, because here already black simply takes and rook a7. And actually a4 b4 probably in black's favor here, because the c2 pawn is becoming a bit weak, and there were games, but no problem here for black, just a good position. That's why knight d5 is the main move. And in here, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, rook a7. is already not so easy for black. Maybe at the end of the day black manages to equalize, but I think that was I was planning to do with white, to try still to fight for some small plus. Let's say I think it can go like this, queen d2, and white has some ideas with f4, sometimes a4. I think there were games, and again with accurate play black manages to hold here, but still he needs to prove it, yeah. But lately I noticed that actually why not to play knight bd7? It's not so, I mean, knight takes d5 is more popular, but knight bd7 I tried to make it work for white, but it seems like engines are just well, laughing at white's player and just say, okay, it's equal, there is nothing white can gain, because knight c3, that is the idea. Now you have two knights, and it's seemingly white achieved what he wanted to achieve, but engines are just taking and playing knight f6, just exchanging those knights, you know, and try and okay, knight e7, queen e7, then black gets bishop b7, attacking this e4 pawn, and quite quickly probably will get d5 with a good position. And otherwise you can take on f6, bishop f6. Yes, nominally white is maybe tiny better because of the d6 pawn, but you know, it's very nominal, because black is, it's not too difficult for black to protect this pawn. Then he will get his play on the queen side, I mean some play, or even he can just more or less stay. Yeah, white has some idea with f4, but it's not also not so dangerous. So all in all, I think this is well, quite simple and very reliable line for black. After knight d2, you just play. So anyway, after knight d2, it's quite difficult to play for a win, frankly. Maybe only with this idea of Anish Giri like this to get complicated game, but with bishop e7, I can assure you, you will not be in trouble. So, and then knight b3, this is probably the main move. Even though I don't know, maybe I rather prefer knight d2. Because here bishop e7, bishop g2. What I want to show you now, it's quite new, but I think it's a very good way for black to face knight b3. It's just castles. Again, a4, knight c6. Yeah, knight is heading to b4. So white has to castle. And now, again, b5, knight d5, this position, there were many games. The same story as with a knight on e2. Black has good chances to equalize, but still it's not so trivial. It's not so clear if he can 100% fully equalize, and white has a nice small pressure, and quite a number of players, of positional players like me and Michael Adams, like to play like this. And okay, if black is playing correctly, manages to equalize, okay, then we can still have a game. But of course it's possible. Actually, I believe bishop e6, that would be my choice. Again, I look at this position, and because what happens usually, rook e1 is a very typical move. This position is, yeah, I will explain you the point. White's plan is at some point, let's say knight bd7, that is what usually played most of the time. Then white already plays a4. Well, in case of b5 here, b5 is already dubious, because a typical story here, knight d5. And let's say if you take, first of all, you lose tempi with the bishop. Okay, let's say bishop goes somewhere. And then a very typical story, a5. Yes, and now you cut this b4 pawn, and then you start to attack it. Well, here might be even a direct way to attack this pawn, might be dangerous, because black lost some tempis. But that is usually very scary, because you want rook a4, bishop d2, it's easy just to lose this pawn. So that's why b5 is premature here. Then you should already play b5 in this with this move order, because after a4, b4, knight d5, you can just take, yeah, and then the bishop is not hanging, so ed is not dangerous already, because you can already get a5. And as you, yeah, queen d5, rook a7 seems to be acceptable. So after castles, bishop e6, now still a4, obviously knight c6. So white is playing rook e1, a useful move. And the idea is that after knight d7, a4 already, when the knight is on d7, rook c8, and now white tries slowly to maneuver his knight to e3. I think the main move is knight d2 in this position. Then, of course, if white gets his second knight to d5, then, well, it can be quite unpleasant for black. So the black's idea is that in the meantime, he has to find something, some counterplay, to stop white from realizing his plan. Which is not so easy. I mean, here white can be a bit better actually. It's strategically dangerous position for black in this particular scenario, because this, knight, if white has a clear plan, black has many different ways of playing, but nothing extremely convincing. Okay, sometimes black is trying to do something of this sort, trying to bother with a rook, but again, if it will not work, and white will manage, even here, he can just go knight e3 and rook d4, okay, queen e2. White will manage to get knight e5, maybe. I'm not so sure about that it's so easy for black. At least, by the way, computer statistics is pretty good for white here. I mean, so that's why I thought that actually against knight b3, probably b5 is the best way of playing, and then just to accurately try to equalize after knight d5 with a few accurate moves. But again, preparing this lesson, I realized there is a very interesting move order, which is again quite fresh, so just for you. Queen c7. And in my opinion, it's actually maybe the best way to reply against knight b3 line, because it leaves black with with the winning chances. It's not too passive, and and it's objectively, I think, working pretty well. So now a4, that is what sooner or later you have to play. I mean, now you are ready to, because if you start immediately with knight d2, already black can probably play b5, and that is fine. And after knight f1, you are in time to push b4 already. And here, for example, and here it's not quite clear what is knight doing on f1. So you can take, for instance, the typical a5, knight a6. I mean, it's a bit of maneuver is a bit strange. Also, knight d2, knight c6 might work, and then trying to follow with knight, trying to get to d4. So usually a4 is played, and that leads to a transposition most of the time, because black is just going knight d7. Again, because if he goes knight c6, then knight d5 already here comes and takes, and knight b4 simply c3. But I found this quite new idea, rook c8, and as strange as it looks. So actually, I'm with black. I'm just waiting with my knight on b8. So the idea is that if white starts to maneuver his knight to f1 e3, then black goes to c6. That is very important. And then, let's say after knight f1, I guess knight d4, also you can put the knight to b4 in this position, and then it's pretty much controls the d5 square, so white cannot really get to d5. He will have to take with a pawn, but normally what white wants is to get a piece on the d5 square. But also, I suppose knight d4 can be interesting. So black has a lot of counterplay. At least knight d2 is not liked by a computer. After knight c6, believes black has a good game. And let's say if white is playing a useful move like h3, I also offer you to play a useful move h6, and again to ask, to wait a bit, developing knight on d7. And once, if white already plays bishop e3, a logical move, then you already go knight d7, because now knight is, this e3 square is busy, is not free. And this main maneuver of white is not so dangerous. Knight d2 already. So after rook c8, I've checked, let's say a5, because also, or h3, h6, a5, because also, white is running out of useful moves. Now already knight bd7 worked because it's quite important that with a pawn on a5, after knight d2, black already starts very quickly to create counterplay. b5, threatening b4, and ab, knight b6, and here everything is fine. Black has knight c4 ideas also, so black is in time with his counterplay. And let's say h3, you already know h6. So now knight d2, b5, and bishop e3. Also, what is quite important, you quickly create counterplay. b5 and ab, knight b6, and this position is just fine for black. Knight is heading to c4, and after knight a5, not the only move, but you can just change the knight c4, and in these open lines, black has definitely enough play. So I think after knight b3, this is a new kind of very fresh way of playing. Queen c7, a4, rook c8. Yeah, I think black is also okay. So here, but again, there are nuances. Yeah, so I mean, again, it depends on the level you are playing. You who is listening to my words now. I mean, this position, if black is not not fully well prepared against g3 line, it can be dangerous. So that's why, again, I myself played it once. So in classical chess, I'm not the player who likes to play all kind of nonsense. No, I really believe that g3 is quite a serious system, which is very sound strategically, and black needs really to know well how he reacts against g3. But now I'm talking to black players of Najdorf. Now you know what to do. You can choose e6 or e5, and now so we are going to move to the 6th bishop e2, which is of course a very, very big and serious line, and I played it quite a number of times, and I played it with both colors as well. So bishop e2, a very big system, a lot of theory. Actually was definitely the main line before maybe Kasparov started to show how to play Sicilian with black, and Najdorf, in particular Najdorf with bishop e2. By the way, in general, if you want to play any Sicilian with black, and especially this Sicilian Najdorf, you should really, first thing you should do is study games of Garry Kasparov, because his way of playing those Sicilians was just amazing. I think nobody can compete with him, and he won so many games. I mean, he felt those positions like no one else, and it was a very dangerous weapon. Even with black in his hands, Najdorf, people were afraid really they didn't know what to do, because on top of his fantastic preparation, but also his play was just amazing. It's really his opening, and really check all his games in Sicilians. But anyways, bishop e2, why I'm telling you this now, because there was a lot of games in this famous match Karpov-Kasparov, actually set of matches, and even Karpov was very successful with the bishop e2 system before playing Kasparov, and maybe that's why it was most fashionable to play this line with white. But then, in fact, I think sometime already starting with the third or fourth match with Garry, he moved to first d4, because I have a feeling he just he just felt like he cannot really break through the Kasparov Sicilians. He had quite disastrous results against Garry in the matches. In all those Sicilians, Garry was just outplaying him quite often. So, but he liked to play e6 against Karpov, and that might be logical, because e5 the structure is more stabilized, and Karpov he liked very much playing with a stable pawn structure, and especially when he had at least one weakness like a d5 square. But in general, nowadays, after bishop e2, the most popular move e5, and I would recommend you actually to play e5 with black. because I tried lots of different things with white, but I couldn't really manage to get an advantage in any line, and that is the same with all other players. I think e5 is doing well for black, very solid, very with a good reserve, and also pretty in many lines, pretty double-edged. You can win games also with e5. Same you can say about e6, but situation in the e6 lines is a little bit less clear for black. I mean, black has more problems after e6, and white has different plans, and actually black also needs to know quite a lot of theory. So it's more practical to play e5, but I wouldn't go as far as saying that e6 is not equalizing. No, you have good chances to get a normal position, but I will show you now. Frankly, if after bishop e2 black would play e6, I would keep on playing bishop e2. But I was turning to other systems just because bishop e2, e5 couldn't really find anything. First of all, g6, yeah, here it's not a good move because a6 is already played. Bishop e2 is not the best system, but still quite dangerous against dragon. Here, g4 is quite a serious move, but frankly, I think bishop e3 is the best. That's what I would recommend you to play with white, queen d2, and it just seems to me that white is simply better in this position. I've analyzed it and couldn't find anything decent for black. I think it's better for white, so you can check it a bit more with white if you want to feel even more confident about it, but I definitely don't recommend you to play with black like this. So then e6. Well, here Anatoly Karpov was always true to his chess style, was always trying to play in a classical fashion, trying to castle short. But there, even though it's also not easy at all for black, but I think black is, according to the state of theory, is doing more or less fine. I'm more concerned about, as usual, about all those ideas when white is trying to play long castle. And I think they are more dangerous for black. But still, you need to know also the classical lines. So let's say you castle first or a4. Well, it doesn't really matter so much if you want to play a4, and probably white has to play a4 if he wants to castle, then better maybe to do it straight away. But because anyway, let's say if white is trying to avoid playing a4, playing like this, then actually, let's say knight c6 and queen e1. Yeah, so trying to save a tempo on a4, but actually now you can play b5, and you've seen this already in my chapter on bishop e2 against Taimanov system. Well, actually here it's like a tempo up for black. I mean half tempo, because queen is already on c7 and white's queen is on g3. Here, I actually doubt black will put the queen on c7. So it's, anyways, it was a very solid system for black. But here, let's say queen g3, probably already bishop b7, some b4 is coming. So I think black should be definitely okay in this position. That's why it's not so popular. Usually white is trying to play a4. And also black cannot really do anything than put the knight on c6. I mean, b6 is not in time, just because b6, bishop b7 would be very nice if he would, and then knight to d7, queen to c7 would be a very nice setup against bishop e2. But here bishop f3 is a problem, because if bishop b7, e5 obviously coming. Rook a7. Bishop e3, and now a5 is a threat, so black has to maneuver with his rook. That is not advisable. Or let's say bishop e7, I mean, instead of knight c6, I mean, white can always do bishop e3, the same story, yeah, that b6 always bishop f3, and castles, and finally you better put the knight on c6, because again, here, this is a problem. for example, and after queen c7, a5, this is already very unpleasant because of b6 square. So all in all, this was that way we get to this classical position, castles, f4. And I already mentioned in one of my previous lessons that Gary was always playing this system, queen c7, king h1, rook e8. I will not go again too deep into this because you can actually record a special course only on this position because it's extremely complicated. A lot of games of very strong players, Kasparov with both colors, Anand with both colors, and so on and so on. Topalov, Ivanchuk, everybody played this position. And finally, I think according to the theory, it's holdable. It's holding. Black is holding here. I mean, I can just mention that white has moves like queen e1, bishop d3, bishop g1, even, for instance, only the most popular moves. I think the main move is bishop f3. So, I mean, there were this Karpov-Kasparov games. Of course, the most famous game is the 24th game in the match of 1985 when Kasparov became world champion, winning this game. Actually, he needed just a draw with black, but he went for this Sicilian. He was so confident that he's treating well those positions, and finally a very good game. I mean, you should really know this game for sure. In any case, you are playing this system or not, just for your chess education and for aesthetic pleasure. So Gary won, became world champion. I remember very well because I was watching it live that time. But okay, so queen c7 is actually holdable, but what I want to say is that lately it seems that bishop d7 move, which was always considered to be not good enough, but now it seems to be equalizing. And I remember that once preparing with white, checking this variation, finally I couldn't find any advantage after bishop d7. I mean, not that I found after queen c7, but at least there was some ideas. But after bishop d7, this is a modern way of treating this position. Yeah, I don't know how to fight, how to get an advantage with white, because the idea black wants to take on d4 and bishop c6, usually it's a good setup. So let's say if white is playing a typical useful move king h1, first of all, you can play rook c8, also just another useful move, and knight b3, knight a5. Probably, but I would advise to take on d4 simply, let's say queen d4, bishop d4, bishop c6, and usually if black manages this, then he is fine. I mean, of course, playable position, but yeah, that is something which wouldn't worry black players, yeah, of having this system. But knight b3 was always considered to be a problem because now white wants to play a5 and black would sometimes play b6 and then queen c7. But now white starts this g4 play, bishop c8. You see black actually lost two tempes, but at least maneuvering his bishop to b7. And there were a lot of games actually still on this position. So after rook f3, white has a very dangerous play on the king side. Not that he's mating by force, not of course, because black has this idea of having the once white goes rook h3, queen h5, knight f8 always is possible, for example. But white has a very dangerous play, and actually white is better also in practical games. Statistics heavily favors white. It's obviously a much better version of this Karpov-Kasparov game from 1985 for white. So that's why bishop d7, knight b3 was not so popular. But actually now knight a5 seems to be equalizing, because e5 now that is a problem. But knight e8. It looks very passive for black, looks very dubious, but since the system started to be played by quite a number of players, there were many tries of trying to refute it, trying to get an advantage, but nothing so far. It was not very successful. I myself tried, not at the board, but at home, to find something also playable for white. Couldn't also manage. I think black holds everywhere in every line. Let's say takes, and then slowly getting out. I mean, white has a certain initiative. This knight on a8, it really takes time for this knight to get out, but in every line, black manages somehow. Let's say knight e4, queen c7. So if you want to play e6, I would recommend you to study bishop d7 system here instead of studying all those theoretical lines, which are not easy also for black. Maybe this bishop d7 is fine. But in any case, I believe that the most interesting systems for white are those systems where he is now trying to play for long castle. One system is bishop e3. So again, if b5, bishop f3, so b5 is premature. I mean, I guess you have to play e5, but then, black lost tempo, and actually both bishop e3 and bishop f3 are quite decent moves, so this should be in white's favor. If knight c6, then again white would probably go for f4, queen d2. This I've already covered, that trying to play this f4 long castle system. Actually, it's not too bad. If you remember, I mentioned that this Rublevsky found this bishop d7, trying quickly to go b5, and maybe it's actually playable for black, because if I think once black already have bishop on e7, that becomes really dangerous. But in any case, this might be possible, but in any case, it's not so easy for black. So usually black is playing queen c7. Well, at least here, white also, by the way, can try to play a4 already to move, to this classical Sicilian with knight c6. But in this position, black already is in time to play b6, because after bishop f3, he has bishop b7. Yeah, the bishop is protected. There is no e5 idea. But after queen c7, most of the time, okay, if f4, also b5 already comes. Yeah. In general, of course, black would like to play b5. It's just that he needs to be always careful about circumstances when he can do it and when here he can. So then it should be played. But queen d2, this very strange b5 a3, bishop b7 f3. Seemingly, it shouldn't be anything for white, yeah, especially with bishop e2 played already. But it's not so easy, this position, to king b1 to equalize with black, because when black plays d5 here, white always has a better development and a certain initiative. I mean, not totally clear if black equalizes with d5. So I would rather maybe advise you then to play at some point h5 in whatever situation, especially after castle, at some point just to go h5. And here we will also, by the way, consider this position via the f3, 6 bishop e3 variation. There only that the bishop is on f1 actually, and white has an extra tempi kind of, but in fact pretty often white anyway puts the bishop on e2, so this position is playable. I've already mentioned that in general, I think in a practical sense it's easier to play with white, because for black it's difficult to castle. He needs to play for quite some time with the king on e8, but it's definitely playable. So bishop e3 is not such a big deal, I would say. But f4 is a very serious move, and here if you want to play e6 variations, which are again completely playable. Just only thing what I want to say is that I believe e5, bishop e2, e5 is doing so well according to modern theory that it's a pity to play e6, but possible. So f4, and now again b5 is not good. Now already e5 is coming. Queen c7. Again, the idea is that in case of knight c6, I would play bishop e3, trying to play this queen d2 long castle system. Bishop e7, also let's say bishop e3. And the idea is that if queen c7, white wants to play g4. Yeah, g4 just to be in time, b5, g5. Or let's say if you castle, also g4, and this is quite dangerous for black. Engines pretend that this is a way to play with black, but and actually given a decent assessment, but I don't like this. I think it's very dangerous for black, this type of positions. And even a move like g5, actually, if you are worried about bishop h4 check, or about some potential ideas for black, even maybe themselves, to play g5 to break in the center. Even g5, well, it's French structure, of course playable for black, but it's not a bulletproof equality. So queen c7 probably is a better try, because the idea, again, in case of bishop e3, of course, already black goes b5, and bishop f3, bishop b7 is possible. So now white has a choice of playing bishop f3, which is maybe not, it's interesting, but not so terrible for black. And let's say knight c6, bishop e3, one of the possible ways how the game can proceed is bishop e7, g4, let's say takes, e5, queen d1, ef, bishop f4. There shouldn't be much, or even doesn't really look like anything for white, but still engines give some small plus for white. So trying to play long castle, but that should be playable. I think the main test is g4 move here. h6, yeah, by the way, this is typical. If b5, g5, b4 with the queen already on c7, just that you know this typical idea that white can just go knight b5 first before taking on f6, attacking the queen, and now gf, and then taking the pawn on b5 with advantage. So g4, h6, and we already know that allowing white to play g5 is sometimes is still okay, but in general, yeah, those positions are always quite dangerous for black. So h6, and now white has many moves. I mean, this position is was not very often played, actually. There is not so much theory here, so it needs to be checked. One thing is clear, there is no clear way for white to get an advantage, but white has many tries. A move like bishop f3 can be interesting, then bishop e3, b5, a3, simply followed by bishop f3 and h4. So very complicated position, but not, I cannot tell you that it's clearly fine for black. I mean, not completely sure. And even a very strange way of playing just g5 directly. It takes, knight d7. Now actually g6 looks very challenging, but knight e5 here, black is okay according to engines. But even the move like h4, let's say knight e5, bishop f4, this position is hard to assess. I mean, it might be actually more comfortable, I would say, for white. Maybe to say that white is better is, I wouldn't take such a responsibility. I'm not totally sure, but it's easier to play, and maybe, yeah, this can be also a serious try. So again, e6 is playable, but my opinion with white, objectively, the most challenging is this sharp play, trying to play with a 4g4 or bishop f3, queen d2, f3. But okay, castle also is, yeah, at least if you're playing positional way with castle and a4, yeah, you have full control on the position, and black has to know quite a lot actually there to equalize. So that is about e6 move, but let's now move to e5, and yeah, I think it's a good system. So now, well, knight f5 is not serious. Black is just fine. d5, bishop g5, d4, bishop f6. Well, still gf6, by the way, is good here. Also, white is playing knight b1, but I don't think he's any better. But also queen f6 is possible. Knight d5, queen d8. Let's say c4, g6, knight g3, knight c6. Well, complicated position. I don't see why if it's white who is fighting for advantage and not black, for example, because he has some h5 ideas. I would rather take black in this position. So knight f5 is not too serious. Knight f3 lately became, well, relatively popular. This move, the idea is that if h6, just to stop bishop g5, then white has this ideas knight d2, trying to go knight c4, knight e3, with some chances. Not easy to equalize here with black. But I believe bishop e7 is fine. Of course, the idea, you know it already, bishop g5. Well, if black is playing bishop e6, then knight g5, yeah, obviously. So bishop e7, bishop g5, that's the whole point of the play. Now, most of the top players, for some reason, they play knight bd7 here, and then some complicated position, probably also perfectly okay for black. Here h6, or here queen c7, let's say knight d2, and some even lines like this are playable for black. But I actually don't understand what's the problem with bishop e6. I think it's just an equal position and very simple way of equalizing. So maybe just because black wants something a little sharper, a little bit more complicated and funny if you want. But bishop e6, you want knight bd7, we already know this pattern takes. Now queen d2 is a bit more accurate, because knight d5 immediately knight d7, black doesn't even have to play bishop e7 anymore. Let's say castles rook c8, and then a very typical position. Black knight on f3 is not so great here. I mean, it's very far from the d5 square, and black, I think, quite easily equalizes here. So queen d2, castles, short castle, and now bishop e7. I mean, again, black's play is very standard here, and he's in time. I think he manages to equalize. Let's say, or queen c7 can be played. Okay, if rook d1, bishop e7, it leads to this position sooner than later, this type of position. Actually, of course, it's very dangerous strategically for black, because okay, this d5 square and white squares, if knight or bishop gets to d5 and stabilizes there, of course white will be better, but it's just that he tactically cannot manage. Black, for example, there was a very good game on this structure, I remember, because I played also in the same tournament. It was Carlsen Giri in Doha Open. So Magnus was trying to get some piece on d5 too, but he could never manage. So Anish Giri was always creating some play, because once knight leaves f3 squares, and black can get his bishop to g5. So all in all, let's say c3, bishop e7. Now black also wants knight f6, for instance, queen d3, d5 already. So maybe white can play knight d2 at least to stop this idea, and b5, knight can get to b6. So also my game with Giri in the g3 line, I think we had the same type of structure finally, and it's very difficult for white to manage this knight on e3, bishop on b3. Yeah, we can dream about it, but it's almost impossible. And in this game finally was a kind of logical draw. Carlsen Giri, he couldn't manage actually anything here. So that is also fine, but another way which is fine is bishop e7. So black has a different idea. He doesn't want to take on d5, so he wants just to play knight d7. So knight d5, knight d7. Okay, now if rook d1, black can take, and of course b5 is possible, but here even queen b6, it's a big question how white simply technically managed to set up his pieces, because queen b3, maybe I can even take already or move, and then I don't know if, let's say, takes, knight c5 or knight f6, simply d5 maybe will come. Yeah, so it's also a matter of tempers. It considers, knight e7 considers to be, by the way, I guess after rook d1 you can also play rook c8, yeah, and maybe still knight e7 will just transpose. But anyway, yeah, I mean, black has quite a serious reserve in this position. I mean, it's no more than one way of playing. But let's say knight e7, queen e7, rook d1, rook c8, counter-attacking the pawn on c2, c3, rook c6. And this position would be just totally equal, but at least white can play knight g5 and then try to take this bishop on e6, even though I mean, it considers to be that white can still try something, but frankly, for any serious Najdorf player, I don't think he would be worried. It's just, you know, it's, well, I don't believe a second that white can really win this position, even though maybe nominally he has a tiny plus. So yeah, I think this is very simple against knight f3. Okay, if you want with black to play a bit more sharp, then maybe this system, but for me, I would just do this and laugh into the face of my opponent who wants to pretend that he's slightly better. But okay, knight b3 is the main move, obviously. Now bishop e7. That's quite important to start with bishop e7, because if bishop e6 and f4 is very unpleasant. White wants to play f5, and after ef bishop f4, well, white actually saved the tempi. He is taken on f4 immediately. Most of the time he plays first bishop e3 and then f4, ef bishop f4. So this position is in white's favor. That's why really bishop e7 you should start. Because the idea is that in case of f4, now you just play b5 here. You don't take anymore. Because f5 is not a threat. So this is quite harmless. As I've already mentioned, once in those structures white is playing f4, then this e4 pawn is becoming a permanent target. So not that it's not playable, of course, and in quite many lines white still tries to play with f4, but yeah, you have to be careful that your e4 pawn will not fall at some point. By the way, remember, you can check the game, how it can happen. Carlson Nepomniachtchi from Vaikanzea, long time ago, Nepomniachtchi won with black, and it was exactly this, that at some point was this type of structure, and then e4 pawn started to be very weak and collapsed tactically. A good game anyway, also, which shows some typical ideas of this structure. So anyways, what are the options here for white? Let's check. G4 is nothing. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense if white manages to play G5, but he will not, because H6. After H4, bishop E6, well, because of the pin on the H line, you cannot play G5, Hg, Hg. So bishop E3. Here after D5, white changes everything and has a little plus still in this position. I think bishop d5, bishop f3, even though a few accurate moves and he actually should manage to equalize. But still, I believe knight d7 is simpler, because again, you won't just rook c8, b5, typical play. And if white is insisting on rook g1 trying to get g5, then black can have rook knight h7, and actually engines are saying that maybe rook h1 is the best move here. And but okay, so the g4 is really not dangerous. h4, strangely enough, it was played even by Wesley So, such a solid positional player. I mean, it is playable. Strange move, hard to believe it can be dangerous, but, well, it is at least playable. So here black has a big choice of options. I'm not sure that actually after h5 there is anything for white, really. Bishop g5, bishop e6. Of course, yeah, I mean, it's definitely playable. You know, it's nice to have the g5 square, but still, yeah, the idea of queen d2, knight d7, yeah, maybe black is fine, but better to avoid it, of course. So let's say you can play bishop e6, and then white's idea is to play f4. Well, I think black should be fine in different ways. Yeah, for example, just take knight c6, queen d2. Of course, h4 is quite a problem. This pawn on h4. I mean, well, not only that it's a loss of tempi, but sometimes also the g4 square becomes weak. I mean, normally, of course, white would prefer to have the pawn on h3. Yes, and maybe here actually also simply d5 should normally equalize. I mean, with a pawn on h2, there is this theoretical position is completely fine. Here, maybe white can try to get some h5 at some point, but I mean, I don't believe in general in this h4. This kind of play cannot be good. You know, it's, after all, we started to play very classical system and then all of a sudden make some crazy h4 move. Okay, so I wouldn't worry much about it. Bishop g5, this is serious. Actually, it was, I think, me who played it first on the top level. I mean, who revived the system, which is rather popular nowadays. Not because it's so good, just because white cannot really find anything in any line, frankly. But so the idea before, I mean, I noticed that bishop g5, it was considered to be not good because of simply knight bd7. Followed by h6, but I noticed that after a4, situation is not so easy for black here, because if queen c7, a5, if b6, that is, I think, what Boris Gelfand played against me, Rapid Chess 2003, I won quite a nice positional game. Then bishop c4, and this position, well, you can check this game, yeah, black was suffering a bit at least. And after h6, bishop e3, b6, okay, black has an extra tempo h6, but this setup is not the best against this classical play. We are going to see it later on during this lesson. So here white has chances for an advantage. So that's for the best move is bishop e6 here, and the idea you already know, bishop f6, queen d3. Well, frankly, it's not a big deal, or I can be more, well, simply saying it's nothing for white, but at least it was fresh at that time. Now there are many games played already with this system. Knight c6 is very logical, long castle knight d4, very direct way of playing, but still this position after you play knight d5, takes, it's a little, I think black should hold it, but since he has a little bit, weak pawn structure, the bishop is passive and white can start some play on the king side once black will castle. It's still not so easy to equalize fully with black here. Then black has, he can castle, of course, also long castle, queen b6. That is a possible way of playing, but, you need, let's say, after queen takes d6, queen takes f2, it's not so easy. It's kind of, a little bit tricky. I think engines finally managed to equalize here, but obviously it's a bit dangerous. So what I would offer, actually, I think what is the simplest way of playing is just, let's say, queen c7 or bishop e7. You can start, but let's say queen c7. So long castle is the only real try for white to fight for something, because rook d1, bishop e7, this we already know that this type of position after knight d5, you just takes, and simply go knight d7. And again, it's also a question if white simply can manage at all to set up his pieces. Even if he manages, it will be very difficult to get something on d5. But here, for instance, knight f6, maybe queen d3, and then castles and rook d8, d5 simply can come. And of course, if white puts his pawn on c4, then it's limiting his bishop. And black, let's say, just to show you, let's say white wants to play c4, then one day black bishop will get to b6 for sure. Yeah, that's no doubt. Not even mentioning that black has all sorts of idea connected with b5. So short castle wouldn't give anything. So nowadays players are playing long castle in this position. Bishop e7 and knight d5. Takes, knight d7. So this position... but black is perfectly fine here. I mean, the idea that white slowly but surely trying to get his knight via f1, let's say king b1, long castle, queen d3, for example. Then black just goes b5 and white starts h4, knight d2, knight f1, knight e3, but it's just very long. I mean, mate, of course there is no mate, it's more of a strategical idea of trying to maneuver the knight to d5, but black, in the meantime, I mean, according to engines at least, they create rather quickly, can be quite dangerous counterplay actually, with rook b8, a5, b4, e4, knight b6. Some games are played on the quite serious level, and on this position, I don't believe white is any better here. I mean, his king can be in danger, and it's pretty risky also, actually. So I think bishop g5 system is, bishop e6, this position is just fine for black, nothing to worry about. The main move in this position is castles, but There is bishop e3 option. Most of the time it leads to transpositions, but let's check. Bishop e6, and now, yes, now f4, already ef4, bishop f4, as I've mentioned, white lost a tempi compared to 7th bishop e6, f4, and knight c6, queen d2, d5 is already easily equalizing. So there are many games and it's just an equal position. Then white can try to play knight d5 here, knight bd, but after knight bd7, anyway, the best move is queen d3. So let us consider via the queen d3 move order. Knight bd7. Actually, black can try to castle first, because anyways, long castle here looks to me a bit too dangerous. b5. And if white, of course, white can always castle short, that would transpose knight bd7 and so on, transpose to the same story. But knight d5, and here, compared to the main line after which we are going to consider now, black also has additional option to take on d5 and bishop c8. By the way, pretty decent as well. It's a typical complicated position. But let's say knight bd7, this or that way we are reaching this position, knight d5, black castles. Now white doesn't really have time to play c4 because b5, very important move, otherwise white could get some plus. But after b5 he has absolutely nothing, has to be careful not to get slightly worse. So castles. You see this position we can reach via different move orders, also starting with a castle, then queen d3. So it's quite an important position in this variation. Lately, white started to try playing like this. Not really that white has any advantage here, I believe, but at least the game is complicated, strategical, and black doesn't have any very straightforward way to equalize and to simplify the position. But as a Najdorf players, it's not what we want, is to simplify the position and try to make a draw. We are happy to play a complicated position, and here black is perfectly fine in my opinion. White also, so I mean, it's not really I don't like so much these positions with white. Frankly, I kind of like it more with black. Maybe my experience as a Sicilian player with black and Sveshnikov, because it reminds a bit the Sveshnikov structures, make me feel like this. Because with white, more a d4 player than e4 player. But here, it's probably objectively just dynamically equal, very complicated position. By the way, just want to mention that b5, a4 is not so good because of a4, and white somehow managed to create some problems on the queen side. So bishop takes d5, e d5, and now black has many different options. Quite often black is just playing knight c5, knight takes c5, dc5, and then c4, then to put something on d6, bishop on knight. This is a strange position, really. It's hard to understand. Is it slightly better for white or maybe not? Because, of course, white has this powerful d5 pawn, but under some circumstances, just imagine that the black square bishops are exchanged and black's knight is on d6. It's already black who can be better. So complicated strategical position, but I personally like more, very logical move, rook c8. c4, and now again black has different black can play in different way. There are many, by the way, games of strong players with each colors in this position, so you can study all those games. For example, one of the possible plans is just to play a5, let's say rook ad1 b6, so to try to block as much as possible the queen side, and then at some points starting to create play on the other side of the board. Well, here white has this idea of trying to transfer the knight to b5 slowly. It's, of course, it's a long way, but still like this, for example, like this, or even like this maybe. But even if it one day arrives to b5, first of all, black will do something in the meantime, and also it's not dramatic, yeah. But it will be difficult to get it to b5, so that's perfectly playable. But probably I actually like most 98, and this was exactly the quite famous game. Alexander Grishuk, he managed to win with black against Magnus Carlsen in classical chess in St. Louis, playing 98. It was, again, a very complicated game. So black just wants to get f5, maybe g6, knight g7, bishop g5 somewhere. Well, normal position, playable. So bishop e3 is fine, but, well, I don't think as a Najdorf player you will worry, you'll be too worried about playing this typical complicated position. Then castles, now again, bishop e6 is too early, f4, so, and f5, white wants to play f5, otherwise ef, bishop takes f4 is a tempi up, so black should castle. So it's a very simple, by the way, pattern. So you better don't play bishop e6 in this bishop e2, e5 variation before white plays bishop e3. That is the idea. So in order not to lose tempi after f4 ef, that not to be tempi down. So castle here. Well, there are several setups for white. One is kind of strange setup, rook e1. Let's say, well, you see, it's a bit premature to play b5 too early in many positions, also after bishop e3, because white gets this play a4 before knight d5, and it's much better version compared to, for instance, to the g3 variation, because bishop on g2 is a bit passive. Here it's looking on the queen side, and this can really be better for white. So don't hurry with b5 if you play it with black. Rook e1, bishop e6, of course, logical, and now bishop f3. Again, this setup is playable, no more than that. I mean, I don't see why it's better than, let's say, the setup which white is trying to achieve in the main line. So knight bd7, now already b5 often is a threat, so a4. And it's, well, the same. White is just trying to slowly to maneuver his knight via f1. For example, if black plays rook c8, a5, let's say h6, bishop e3, queen c7, and then maybe knight d2, and rook d8, knight f1. Sometimes they play knight g3, h3. Okay, black cannot really do much in this position, cannot create immediate counterplay, but also black has a lot of different ideas. I mean, it's a complicated game, but I think that it's better, if you are playing black, it's better to try not to create counterplay quicker, not to give white this kind of type of position where he can move around. So I personally prefer queen b8, and this is what, for instance, Vasyl Agraf was playing. It's more direct somehow, because the idea very often is bishop d8, that bishop gets to this diagonal. Let's say if knight d2, then bishop d8. The idea is, in case of a5, black just plays b6 and activates his bishop. So knight f1, bishop a5, for instance. This is one of the games of Vasyl Agraf. Bishop d2, queen c7, knight e3, rook ac8. Well, white managed to get his knight to e3, but it's still very difficult to play knight d5. I mean, black will just take. And the bishop on a5 is already active. So black is doing fine, I believe, here. So that's why after queen b8, maybe bishop e3 is a move. And again, here, I think the simplest is just rook c8. And it's quite difficult for white to find adequate plan. And also black, very soon bishop d8, bishop b6, even rook c4, b5, black has his play as well. So I don't really see, let's say, if queen d2, black can play simply bishop d8. Let's say some rook to d1, rook c6, for example. At some point b5 might come, and this knight d5 is never clear. First of all, you are not even threatening anything. Black can probably even play b5. or even taken also might be not so clear. I mean, something like this, but I would say probably knight d5, you just play some move. Maybe white wants knight b4 somewhere, but still rook c4. I mean, it's a complicated position, but my experience shows that, yeah, it's also possible to get worse with white. I mean, black has a very flexible position, and if you try too hard, you can have a problem. So I think this is very, very fine. And if, let's say, a5, black can even start immediately counterplay with b5. That's why I like this queen b8, rook c8 setup, and to keep the rook on a8, that the a6 pawn is protected. So all in all, this rook e1, bishop f3 is just a game, but it's not really a big try for any opening advantage. Then king h1 was a very popular move, I would say end of 90s, middle of 90s, end of 90s. But now, well, nowadays engines are just laughing at all white's attempts and pretend that black is fine almost anyhow. But I believe the best way, I mean, I'm a bit exaggerating, but for instance, the idea is that after bishop e6, f4, again, you see white is trying to fight for this tempi. So to take on f4 and to play with bishop on c1 and to play a useful move king h1. And now after knight c6, he has queen e1, and this position, by the way, still maybe nothing special for white, but at least d5 is more difficult to manage because e d5, knight d5, maybe white has rook d1. And in this position with king on g1, black would just check on b6, of course, yeah. So at least he doesn't let, after bishop e6, black cannot immediately simplify the game and equalize. Also, b5 is actually a bit dubious because a4, bishop b7, knight d5. Very, very precise move, and well, it seems that even if it's again always playable for black, but I wouldn't recommend you doing it with black because so far nobody could find a very clear-cut way to equalize here. So what else? b6 is not a bad move at all. b6 was very popular. Again, a little bit strange idea. The idea is after bishop e3, bishop b7, f3, and now b5. Okay, like losing a tempi, but at least after a4, now you have b4. And there was a kind of big discussion in this position. I remember games Anand Gelfand and so on. Something of this sort, knight d7, then white was trying to play c3 or c4. Let's say this position takes, bishop g5, bishop g1. And I think it's also okay for black, but well, white has some play at least on the queen side. But I mean, all this could be playable, but actually knight c6 to me is like a killer of king h1. I played myself with white once, king h1, hoping probably for some other move than knight c6 because I had absolutely nothing against this. And nowadays it's like already ultimate wisdom. Everybody is playing knight c6, and it's true. I tried my best, but with white I gave up to even I couldn't find the slightest idea in this position for white. So for you, I would definitely advise knight c6. What can be done? Once I played against Vallejo in Linares, I played bishop e3, bishop e6, f3 or f3, bishop e6, bishop e3. But of course this is very little. d5, e d5, takes, bishop d5, c3. And he played not badly at all against me. I mean, I thought maybe white can, well, pretend to get a very small plus because of 3 against 2, and white has quite a harmonious setup, but actually it's really too little. Maybe even the best move is h6, just a useful move, and asking white what does he want. For example, if queen d2, black can just play bishop e6, for instance. Very probably just nothing, but he played rook c8, also not so bad, because queen e1, okay, now white wants rook d1, but knight a5, a very, very strong move. Looks strange, but it works. Rook d1, for example, knight take on b3, queen a5, before queen a2. Strange, but black is equalizing like this also. So this is bishop e3 is solid, but no more than that. Against Topalov once in Vaikanze, I played f4, but this is, I don't even remember why I played it. Maybe I was expecting some other moves than knight c6, like b6, maybe I was preparing, and Topalov played like that before, and against me he went knight c6, and I didn't really have an idea against it. That's possible because what I played is really harmless. f4, b5, bishop f3, and now, well, almost any move is fine. Topalov played knight a5 against me and equalized easily, but also almost, any move. Bishop d7 is fine. Computer also likes before knight d5, a5. So this is typical position. Usually the structure when black manages b5 and f4, e4 against d6, e5, unless you get very quickly g4 or f5, g4, g5, well, nothing for white. So f4 is not really serious move. And then f3, this is the main move. And now black found a very, very simple way to equalize here. If bishop e6, knight d5, otherwise black wants to play d5. And now probably b5 is also okay. I mean, playable b5, c3, for instance, and takes a knight a5. But at least white can play here, even though I believe black is perfectly fine. But actually a5 is just killing the line, I would say, because here white has absolutely nothing. I mean, as you already know, this typical idea that if you play a4, then bishop d5, e d5, knight b4 is a problem already. And of course, c4, then this eternal knight, black can only be better, I believe, with all this blockade. So a4 is not an option. Then c4, a4. Yeah, now white gets... have to play knight d2, and there's quite a bad, I would say, coordination of pieces. And here black is fine in various ways, but actually after knight h5, white has to be already careful not to get worse. Because let's say if knight b1, you just take knight d4 and bishop g5 comes, a lot of counterplay on the black squares. So maybe better to take on e7, queen e7, and now knight b1, at least to try to get knight c3, bishop e3. But of course, black has a lot of time to prevent it. Let's say queen h4, king g1, and knight f4. f5 is also possible, knight f4. And I think if somebody can be a bit better, it's black here. So c4 is also not an option. And then, well, there is not much left than to play bishop e3 here. But then a4, again, knight c1, and the problem is for white is that this pawn sacrifice is very, very good. Takes on d5, knight d4, and black is at least equal. If you take on d4, now black can also queen a5 is a good move, but actually knight d7, black wants a3, bishop f6. Well, it's quite obvious even visually that black has a lot of counterplay here, and even engines start to give a small plus for black already in this position. So I believe king h1, knight c6 is like, I don't know what to do with white against it. That's why king h1, well, now is out of fashion. And, then bishop e3 is only thing what is left, reasonable. Now already bishop e6. Again, now just for your understanding of this position, so repeating you the same idea, very typical for those structures, it's for white, most of the time it's not good to play a4 too early, because then black gets knight c6, and the knight gets to b4. Let's say knight d5, take knight b4, again, the same story, black is fine here. Now, that's why white wants to settle his pieces somehow. f4 is also fine. ef, bishop f4, knight c6 just equal. Rook f4 is possible to take, but also after knight c6. This type of position in general, can only be better for white if his queen is already on g3, rook on d1, king on h1. He needs many tempes. Otherwise, as a type of position, black is usually okay with this pawn structure. So after knight d5, takes knight e5. And then knight fd7, bishop enters to g5 from g5, a very typical position where black often has very serious counterplay. So this is not very prosperous. Then queen d2 is a main move. I tried once queen d3 to play queen d3 against Dingleren in rapid chess. Well, first of all, knight c6, by the way, is not so clear. a3, rook c8, I think it's perfectly playable for black. But usually black is just going knight d7. Again, now knight d5 would transpose to the position we have already analyzed. And a4. Well, why queen on d3? Because now the idea is that in this, after rook c8, rook d1, well, after knight b6, which was quite a problem in queen d2 line, now white has knight d2. At least. I don't know if it's enough for anything really special, but at least I don't let black equalize on the spot. But then actually if black just plays normally, then queen on d3 of course is not, well, it's better on d2 than on d3. But I just wanted to get at least a game. By the way, in this position, engines also are very happy playing knight g4. To me, it looks a little bit strange. Let's say takes. I mean, because you exchange one knight, which is protecting the d5 square, bishop e6, that maybe knight can get to d5. But I guess you just take on d5. So engines believe that knight g4 is perfectly fine. Can be the case. Actually, they're playing some bishop a7. Strange move. Well, whatever. It's possible, but also there is no problem with queen c7, a5. And again, in this position, I will talk about this position a little with the queen on d2, which is, of course, more favorable for white to have queen on d2. You can play it slow, this position. You can play it more directly, like rook fd8. This is what Ding played against me. Bishop f3. And now, again, yeah, h6 is just a game, normal position, I would say more or less equal, but playable at least for white, and that was my idea. But knight c5 is very direct. Actually, he played rather quickly, so he had it analyzed. Knight c5, now it's pretty forced, takes, knight d5, and now takes, and a very important move, f5. And here, black equalizes just by tempo, just move per move, because white has queen b3, idea bishop f7, d6. Then, but you can see this game, finally everything was exchanged, and the beginning was equal position, then I already got some advantage, somehow managed to get pressure, and finally I blundered the rook. I mean, it was online chess, I just misclicked and put the rook on and lost. Okay, anyways. So queen d3 also, I mean, not too dangerous, but from the white side, I can maybe advise you to have a look at it. At least you can get a game after queen d3, because after queen, the problem of queen d2 is that it's very difficult to get a playable position. Now, again, as you know already, b5, always a4 before knight d5, even though here it's not 100% sure that white is better, but it's unpleasant for black. I mean, there is no guarantee that black can equalize here, so why to do it when actually knight bd7 is just a bulletproof move. Now a4, yeah, because black will go b5, black will play b5 sooner than later. So, I mean, you will have to play a4 if you want something here with white. For instance, if rook d1, I suspect already b5 is good, but even if rook c8, then for sure b5 is coming. So you will have to play a4. Nothing you can do about it. So a4. And now, well, there is rook c8. Of course, there are a lot of games here. Karpov liked to play this position very much. With white, he won some games. Geller also was very good at those positions in pre-computer era. So they would put pawn on a5. So you see now it's much more difficult to manage b5 because pawn on a6 is always hanging. And then let's say queen c7 and rook fc1 is possible move, rook fd1. I mean, there are a lot of games here, big theory, black is playing sometimes knight c5, sometimes slowly rook d8, some h6. All this is very interesting. In general, I would say that it's okay. Black has enough counterplay, but the position is tricky. I mean, white has some idea slowly to get at some point trying to get knight d5. Then also the strategical idea, let's say if he manages f3, bishop f1, to settle the pieces. And this very important strategical idea to get the knight to b4 like this or like that. I mean, depends on circumstances. All in all, that is all very interesting and actually complicated playable position. But the problem is that knight b6 is just a killer. I mean, at some point, it was supposed to be playable for white for a long time, but then they found practically a forced draw after knight b6, and that makes all this tabia after rook c8 a5 kind of not so relevant, because knight b6 is, I can recommend you, it just equalizes without any problems. So now a5, because, well, better probably not to wait, because if rook d1, then black already can play rook c8 and actually take with a rook already on c4. Which is even better. So then white still can equalize after bishop g5, knight c4, takes. Black is very active, some pressure on the c line, so white, probably best for white is to take this pawn, and actually it's just a totally equal position. Rook b4 seems to be like practically a forced draw, but there is no need to force it. You can also play bishop e7, rook b6. Well, at least otherwise, I don't know, bishop can get to b4, and it can also be black who can be playing for a win. So rook b6, rook b8, rook d1, let's say h5. White cannot really improve because black rook on c4 is just very powerful, and also black always has this bishop d8, bishop e7 idea. So white is for sure not better, but not worse also. It seems like it should finally end in a draw. So that's why knight b6, a5 has to be played. Knight c4, takes, rook fd1, rook c8. And now very important move, which was supposed to be, well, the K of this position, is knight c1. I think it was played once by Karpov, for example. And then knight is getting to b4. Actually, a very, very subtle positional idea. If, well, computers wouldn't find a very clear path to equality after this. What else? If bishop g5, rook c6, here, well, it's not white who is fighting for something, because let's say now if he starts to maneuver, then already b6. Black is in time to create a very good counterplay. The knight, this knight from c1 will never reach d5. So that's why knight c1 quickly. And I will just show you how the game can develop, that this position actually can be tricky. I mean, you have to be accurate. For instance, Nepomniachtchi played queen c7 once, also in Arkiv there were a couple of games, and you see the bishop b6, queen c6, f3. Now white wants knight d3, knight b4, so black doesn't have so many useful moves. Knight d7, logical, bishop e3. And okay, in case of rook d8, knight a2, knight gets to b4, and white is much better already. And so it's not so easy, this position. And I think Nepomniachtchi played b5 once, and after ab, knight b6, also in Arkiv, I think there was a game, I think Yemelin in Arkiv, and then knight d3, and okay, black got worse, knight gets queen b7 was in the game, b3, bishop e6, knight b4, rook e8, knight d5, and it's clear that white managed his strategical goal. It's still, by the way, of course, black's position is so solid that even this is nothing too terrible. Yeah, black is perfectly having a, well, perfectly defensible position, but obviously white has some pressure. So all this was playable before, well, they found actually d5. The d5 is very tactical, clear way to basically to make a forced draw, I can say. Bishop b6, queen e8. Now knight d5, knight e4. Here black is not worse, of course. E d5 and bishop b4. And black is just getting this pawn back in the position. d6, queen d7. It's pretty forced. If bishop c7, for instance, knight d5 is good. So there was a game Leko Shirov. I think Leko played knight d3. I've checked because this is an important position. I wanted to make it work for white, at least to be able to play this with white. But I just couldn't find anything. It's just a forced draw, which this game proved, because knight d3, bishop takes d6, and knight e5. Otherwise, black can even get better. So here take on c3, bishop b5, and okay. Then later black took on c2 and they shook hands. So yeah, that is about bishop e2 line and all these solid approaches. You see g3 bishop e2 has, especially if black is playing e5, very similar type of positions. I try to explain you the nuances. Again, it's definitely playable with white. If you like this kind of slow positional game, just check games of Geller, Karpov, and good luck. You can try, because of course black has to be very precise and black has to know a lot here to get a good position out of the opening, to equalize. But objectively, if we are talking objectively, I don't see, honestly, I don't see how white can really fight for advantage. Maximum he can get, but those he can get actually in quite few lines. Just a complicated positional strategical game where black, if he knows exactly the first few moves, then he would equalize, and then you just play a complicated position. Not really something which I believe would frighten black. That's why black is playing Najdorf. So both players are happy, they got what they want, and then a better player would prevail. So that is about the solid lines against Najdorf. Now the next lesson will be about some, not the main line, but two rather sharp lines when white is trying to play aggressive. And then we will move to the two actually major main lines and the most popular in nowadays practice.